Hi. Well, this is Sunday afternoon, and I came back to the houseplant sale for another look in case they'd put out anything new. Quite a lot of stuff has gone. There were a lot more mother-in-law tongues yesterday, for example, and I see even some of the citrus trees have gone. So I'm just having a quick wander around. That's a sedum, I think, pointed out yesterday. Let's see whether they want something to eat. No, I'm afraid I don't think they're feeling too well. Yeah, coochie coo.
They smell disgusting.
No, poor things.
Oh.
Oh well, I can't give these to the fly traps. I'll give them to the neighbour's cat.
Okay.
Yeah, they've got a lot of those. Most of the other stuff is the same, but I think they've got more cacti. One thing that a lot of people don't know about cacti, obviously they have spines, but in some species the spines come out and stick in you, and it can be very difficult to remove them. I think most of the prickly pear variety, the opuntias, are like that, and certainly when I was looking after the cacti at home, I would sometimes accidentally brush my hand against them, and it would come off covered in a fuzz of little tiny spines, and I then had to spend the next hour removing them with tweezers. It was quite amazing, therefore, that one of our cats one night felt thirsty, got to one of the cacti and just slit it down from top to bottom, slit it vertically with its claws, and then drank some of the juice out of it. And as far as we could tell, the cat wasn't harmed at all. It certainly didn't turn up with spines sticking into it all over. But they can be difficult to look after for that reason if you don't know. They've got I didn't see any of these ones yesterday. Those are nice. I don't know whether the bright green things are part of the plant or decorations. I think they're part of the plant, just because it would have been too much effort to stick decorations like that. You do sometimes see oddly incongruous bits of cacti together because cactus growers sometimes produce variegated or coloured varieties which can't photosynthesize very much, and they graft them onto other varieties which are plain green and have normal photosynthesis and are therefore much stronger. But they're pretty wonderful things. Those are prickly pears, and if I brushed against the one that I'm pointing at now, my hand would end up with most of those spines in it, and it would not be at all pleasant. The individual segments also have a habit of breaking off and dropping onto the ground. In the wild, that's how the plant reproduces. It's why prickly pears were such a big problem in Australia.
How much are those? I think the cheapest one is $3.
And these are rather magical. If they're what I think they are, and I could be wrong, they're what are called window plants. They grow in, for example, the Namibian desert, and the sun they receive is so strong that they have to protect themselves by growing special thick barriers around most of the stem with just a little window at the top to let the light in.
Du kannst von mir auch einen halben Kaktus haben. Der ist ja nicht aus Ochs.
So those are the windows. And one species, one genus, I think, is actually called Fenestraria, from the Latin for window. And generically they're called window plants, or sometimes living stones. Evolution is very clever. It produces all sorts of things you'd never suspect.
But you know, won't get bitte mal. Okay?
Nee? Oh, wait a minute. Da hinten sind noch kleine, Olli. This is always fine.
It's so nice.
Now those look like pineapples. Well, that's nice to see. Those are Tradescantias again. And remember that name because I'll talk one day about the person who they're named after, because it was partly his doing that the Ashmolean exists. Sir John Tradescant. Well, let's try the Venus flytraps one more time. So, right, there's a Dreamy. Which one looks as though it's in need of a good refreshment? How about him? Come on. Puss, 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 puss. Puss, puss, puss. No. Maybe this one. Actually, this one looks very badly damaged, poor thing. Oh, look at that. No. I'm afraid none of them are hungry. Oh well, the neighbours have a lovely black and white cat that likes sitting on people's cars and looking out into the street, so I'll put this back in the bag and give it to the cat when I get home. Bring the outside in. Well, I like that. I like plants because they display the incredible creativeness of evolution in a very small space, and you can see just how ingenious it is at inventing all sorts of mechanisms that we'd never suspect. Orchids are a good example. I don't think there are any orchids on these stalls. Maybe they're too expensive or too delicate. But orchids are well known for mimicry, that is, having flowers which have evolved to look like bees, for example, so they attract bees to them to get pollinated. And there are some orchids that go even further by having complicated mechanisms inside the flower to assist pollination. There's something called bucket orchid, and if I remember rightly, it works like this. The bee comes to a bucket orchid flower, and part of the flower is actually a little bucket with nectar in. The bee starts by crawling through a tunnel on one side of the flower, and the tunnel's made by a sort of raised floor and lowered ceiling. Just the gap between them is just enough to admit the bee. But on the roof of the tunnel, there are two rods that have pollen at their ends, and the bee is forced to brush against them, and they break off. They have evolved to be only weakly attached to the flower, and they break off, and they've got glue on, and the glue sticks them to the bee's head. So the bee is now wandering around with this sort of pair of pollen-laden horns. Like metal araldite or any other glue, the glue takes time to set, and the flower has arranged to confine the bee within itself until the glue does set. After going through the tunnel, the bee falls into a bucket of nectar, or at least it gets led to a bucket of nectar anyway, and there's a flap on the other side of the flower which is shut, so the bee can't get out. But eventually the flap opens, and something inside the flower has evolved so that the flap opens at about the same time as the glue sets. So the bee is forced to stay inside the flower until the glue has set, so that the rods don't drop off and waste the flower's resources. And that's incredibly clever. I only wish I had that sort of gear with the epoxy glues that I buy. And then the bee's got these pollen-containing rods stuck to its head, and the orchid overall has to get the bee to another flower of the same species, obviously, so that that flower can receive the pollen, and the two can mate to produce seeds. And the second flower does the same sort of thing to the bee, but in reverse. It arranges for the bee to get the sticks knocked off and for them to make contact with the part of the flower that receives the pollen. And since the flower species is still going strong, since this particular orchid species is still going strong, it evidently all works. So, plants, pretty wonderful things. I've just mentioned evolution. I very strongly suspect that that's been debated in the Union a good few times. I mentioned the restrictive laws when I came to the sale yesterday, and I'm sure there were students both in and out of the Union who got done by the university, or the university attempted to penalise for promoting evolution, or even promoting knowledge of evolution, or even discussing it. Well, there is one thing that disappoints me. The flowers, the plants rather, generally have nice vivid designs and some colour, even if a lot of that is green. The people buying them, unfortunately, don't, and they're all dressed in the same sort of stuff that I've complained about before. Far too many blacks and greys and beiges and just stuff that's completely uninspiring, especially today, because although it was a nice morning for the half marathon, it's now gone bleak and overcast with a faint north wind, and it just feels about 5 degrees colder than it has any right to, and it's gloomy. So it'd be so nice to see people wearing some colour and cheering us all up. So that's one thing. The other thing is that I think it would be rather nice if, rather than having this outside for 2 days of the year, we had a proper florist's inside the Union, so that the flowers could be placed, the plants could be placed in a florist shop whose decor matched that of the rest of the Union. I know this is a radical suggestion, but then people speaking at the Union are supposed to be radical, so why not? And where customers could go to look at Venus flytraps, cacti, prickly pears, and other plants. And since this is a very short video, I'm going to include a few pictures of possible such shops before I end. So there's one there. And there are some others following. I'll see you next time.